we're going to begin building our customer table. Now that we know our way around the Access interface, let's create our first table. Go back through your index cards and find the card for your customer table. These are all the fields that we're going to add to the table in the database. Now there are two ways to create a table. Click on the Create tab, and here you'll see Table and Table Design. Now Table by itself puts us in Datasheet view. And this is what Access started before. I personally don't care for Datasheet view. Datasheet view is okay for entering data, but if you're designing a new table, I recommend using Design view. So come over here and close this. If you're going to create a new table, I recommend clicking on Create and then Table Design. This is Table Design view. This is where we specify the structure of the table first before putting any of the data in it. And that's the main benefit of using a table in Access, is you can define the structure of the table and enforce rules and what kinds of data go into each field. Spreadsheet programs like Microsoft Excel just let anybody type anything anywhere on the sheet, where with Access we want strict control over what information goes where. Down below here you can see we have three columns. The first column is where we type in the field name. Then we specify the data type, what kind of information does this field hold. Then optionally we can type in a description. So let's start off with our first field. In this case, first name. Remember, I don't like putting spaces in my field names. So it's capital first, no space, capital name. Now this is really more of a matter of style than anything else, but this is my personal preferred style. You might see some other Access developers or authors of other books use underscores. For example, first underscore name. That's perfectly fine too. In fact, they might not even capitalize first name. That's fine as well. The problem basically is that if you do use spaces in your field names, later on when we get into programming or writing macros or some SQL statements, you have to remember to put brackets around everything, and that just becomes a pain. So choose one method of naming your fields and maintain consistency. Personally, I recommend that you stick with my naming conventions. Once you've got first name typed in, press the Tab key. Now we're at the data type column. This is where you specify what kind of data the first name field is going to store. If you drop this box down, you'll see the complete listing of all the different data types that Microsoft Access supports. The first type of data is text, and you'll probably use text fields more than anything else. Text fields are most printable characters, A through Z, uppercase and lowercase, and 0 through 9, plus pretty much everything else on the keyboard that is a printable character. Text fields can be up to 255 characters long, so they can store a decent amount of information. The next data type is a memo field. Memo fields are essentially very long text fields. Where text fields can only store 255 characters of data, a memo field can store over 65,000 characters of data. Memo fields also support formatted text. So if you want to bold or italicize some text, or maybe change the text color, you can use a memo field for that. Don't use memo fields for everything though, because they do lack some of the functionality that simple text fields have, and we'll talk about the differences in a future class. Essentially, for small bits of information like someone's name or their address or phone number, use a text field. If you have to type in lots and lots of information or formatted text, use a memo field. Next we have numbers. Number fields can store either counting numbers, also called integers, or decimal values, also called floating point values. Unlike text fields, you can perform calculations on numbers. So you can calculate the sum or average of a bunch of number fields, for example. A date-time field can store either a date or a time or both, So you could have January 1st, 1980, or just 4:55 p.m., or you could have January 1st, 1980 at 4:55 p.m. Those are all valid date time values. Next, we have the currency data type, which is a special number that is optimized for dealing with dollar values. A yes/no field stores either a true or false value. It may be called yes/no, true/false, on/off. These are called Boolean values. Next, we have a very important data type called an auto number. An auto number is essentially an automatic counter field. It will start at 1 with the first record, and Access will automatically increment that number for you with each following record. So the next record is 2, then 3, and so on. You don't need to worry about maintaining that auto number yourself. We'll use auto numbers for identifying unique records. Each customer, for example, will have a customer ID that is an auto number. Next, we have OLE objects. OLE stands for Object Linking and Embedding, and this is basically anything that you can copy and paste in Windows. It can be a picture, a document file, a video, an Excel spreadsheet, a sound clip. Anything you can copy and paste in Windows can generally be stored in an OLE object. Similar to an OLE object, an attachment data type field can store pretty much any kind of file in Windows. Attachment fields have some advantages and disadvantages. For example, attachments can be compressed to save space in the database. We'll talk about the differences between attachments and OLE objects in a future lesson. A hyperlink field is good for storing a link to a web page or an email address. If the user clicks on the hyperlink, their web browser or email program will launch automatically. A calculated field stores the result of a calculation in your table. For example, you might have sale price minus unit cost equals profit, and you can store that in a profit field. Generally, I don't recommend using calculated fields. We're going to do calculations in our queries. There are some exceptions, and we'll talk about those later. Finally, we have the lookup wizard. The lookup wizard allows you to look up a value from another table. For example, you could use it to select a customer while you're in your order table. Personally, I don't like lookup wizards. We'll talk about lookup wizards in a future class. So now that we know the basics of all the different data types, which one do you think we should use for the first name field? That one's pretty easy. Let's pick text for that one. Now you can optionally type in a description over here. You don't have to. In fact, I almost never use descriptions. You can type in, "This is the customer's first name," and that will explain to someone else using the database what this field represents. The description field will show up in the status bar on the bottom of a form when a user is typing in data into that field. But again, personally, I almost never use them. So let's move down here and type in the next field name. Let's go with last name. Last, no space, capital, name. We'll also make that a text field. Tab, tab. That'll move us to the next row. Now, what about fields for middle initial or middle name? Prefix, like Mr. or Miss. Suffix, like senior or junior. That's completely up to you. Create as many fields as you want to store whatever data you think you're ever going to need. For the purposes of class, I'm going to keep things simple and just use first name and last name. That's all I ever use in my business, and that's, I think, what most companies use. But, again, break down your information as much as possible. If you ever think you're going to need it in the future, create a field for it. It's much easier to put data fields together later on than it is to try and split them apart. So if you ever think you're going to need a salutation field, add that in now. Continuing on, I'm going to type in a company name field. That's also text. Let's add an address field. That's also text. Now, I've always been happy with a single address field. Some people have address 1, address 2. I don't bother because an address line will wrap around to a second line if necessary if you go to print it out on a report. However, I've also seen some people break the address field down into the street number, the street name, and the street type, whether it's a drive, avenue, and so on. So that's really a decision that you have to make. For me personally, I've always been happy with a single address line. I will create separate fields for city, state, postal code, and country. In Lesson 5, we're continuing to build the customer table. What about some different types of data? Well, let's scroll down here. We can add pretty much as many fields as we want to in the single table. Yes, there is an upper limit, but you realistically should never hit it. Let's put in email, and let's make this a hyperlink field. So when I click on the person's email, it will automatically launch my email program. We can also type in website and make that a hyperlink as well. This time I'll just press H on my keyboard and notice how it automatically fills in hyperlink. I can then just keep pressing tab. Next, how about phone number or just phone? Now this I'm going to also keep as text, not a number. There are a couple of reasons why. First, ask yourself, are you ever going to be performing calculations on this data? Are you ever going to need to find the sum of a bunch of phone numbers or calculate their average? If so, use a number type. If not, use text. Text handles these types of values better. Another factor to take into consideration, leading zeros. Some zip codes start with a 0. Well, if you use a number field to store that, that 0 will fall off, and the value will just become 9,832. So use a text value to store zip codes or postal codes in general. Social Security numbers, for example, sometimes start with a 0. So if the value that you're going to store needs a leading 0, stick with text. Most obviously, sometimes phone numbers can contain text. If you see a phone number somewhere for a contact and it includes text values, you don't want to have to stop and grab your phone and translate those from letters to numbers. You can just type in the text right into your database. Another consideration that usually comes into play later on is sort order. Numbers are always sorted numerically, whereas text values are sorted alphanumerically. In an alphanumeric sort, for example, 10 comes before 2. We'll talk a lot more about this later on when we get into sorting. So again, knowing what we know now, we'll stick with text for our phone number field. Next, I'd like to keep track of how many employees a particular customer has, assuming the customer, of course, is a company. I'm going to type it in as num employees. I'm going to abbreviate number as num. That's okay. Again, just maintain consistency. This is going to be a number field because I might sometime want to run a report that says show me a list of companies with more than 50 employees. I wouldn't be able to do that with a text field. Now when it comes to number fields, you can specify what kind of number you want. The default type is long integer. Long integers are basically counting numbers. 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. And they're negatives. Sometimes, however, you might want a value that has a decimal or floating point number. For example, let's say we want to keep track of their discount rate. What type of a discount does this customer get on his orders? Well, that's going to be a number. And if we come down here in the field size, drop this box down, you can see there's several different kinds of numbers that are available. Now, we're not going to talk about them all today. There's bytes and integers and singles and all kinds of different stuff in here. For now, just be concerned with long integer for counting numbers and double if you need a decimal number. Don't worry about this decimal one down here. That's actually something different. For now, I want you to use long integer or double. Just those two things. We'll talk about all of these in a future class. So I'll pick double because I want a discount rate that might have a decimal point after it, 2.5%, for example. Next, I'd like to keep track of how long this customer has been with us, so I can send loyalty cards to my customers that have been around for 3 years, for example. So customer since, this will be a date time value. Remember, this can be a date or a time or both. Let's keep track of each customer's credit limit. That'll be a currency value. We can program the database later on to yell at us if their outstanding orders are more than $5,000, for example. How about an is active field? That'll be a yes or no value. Now, this is where a field might need some explanation. Someone who doesn't know your database might not know what is active means. You could put here in the description field on mailing list, and that will explain to an onlooker or someone using your database that if the customer is not marked active, he won't receive our mailing list. Let's add in a notes field. That'll be a memo data type. I pretty much include a notes field in just about every table, because almost everything that I can think of might need some extra notes attached to it. The benefit of notes fields is that if you don't use them, they don't take up any space in your database. So it doesn't hurt to add a notes field to each table. Now, we're going to skip some of these data types for now. OLE objects, for example, are really good if you want to store, say, an employee's photo in his record, or you can use an attachment field to attach his resume as a Word document. Calculated fields and lookup wizards, we'll talk about all of these in future classes. But there is one more data type that we're missing. We still have no way to uniquely identify each customer, and that is what the auto number field is for. So let's create an auto number field, and I'm going to call this customer ID. Now, it becomes especially important later on in the expert classes when we start talking about relating tables together that we have a good auto number, a good unique way of identifying each record in a table, and that's what the customer ID is for. We might have 20 Johns. We could have 15 John Smiths. Phone numbers can change or be shared between customers. So the auto number is really the best way of uniquely identifying each customer. It'll never change, and Access will automatically maintain the list for us. The first customer is 1, the second customer is 2, and so on. Auto numbers never get reused, so we don't have to worry about deleting customer 4 and then another customer 4 coming in later. People can't edit customer IDs because auto numbers can't be changed. So it's the perfect field for uniquely identifying each record. In fact, you don't even ever have to see auto numbers in your database if you don't want to. You can if you want to. You can put them on your invoices or show them in your customer form, or you can leave them completely behind the scenes and never see them. Properly built, each table in your database should have its own auto number field. The customer table is going to have a customer ID. The product table will have a product ID. The order table will have an order ID. So each table gets its own auto number field. Now, as a matter of good design, I like putting all of the IDs up at the top of the table. I just built it this way so I could show you how to move fields around. Usually when I start building a table, the very first thing that I do is add the ID field. But now I can show you how to move it. So, take your mouse, click right here on this little box to the left of where it says Customer ID. Let the mouse go. That will select the entire row. Now, click again, and this time drag to the very top of the table. Click and drag, and then release. And there you go. You just moved a field to the top of the table. Again, structurally, Access doesn't care where in the table the auto number field is. I personally like to have them at the top. So now that we've got all the fields in our table, let's save the table. Because right now it just says Table 1, we haven't saved it yet. Let's come up here in the Quick Access toolbar and click on the Save button. the Save As dialog box appears. Give the table a good name. I'm going to call mine Customer T. I like to end all of my table names in T. That differentiates them from queries, which I end in Q, and of course forms and reports, which are F and R. It's an old naming convention. I've been using it for many, many years. Again, I capitalize customer, capitalize T, no spaces in your table names, just like your field names, for the same reasons. For consistency, I like to stick with all singular table names. This way, later on, if I'm making a macro or writing some VB code, I don't have to go, oh, was it customer table or customers table? I always know it's singular. Again, just a personal recommendation. You might see some books refer to their tables with TBL in front of them, like table customers. That's perfectly fine too, and if you're used to doing it that way, then go right ahead. For me personally, this is how I like to build my databases. Customer T, product T, order T, and so on. So I've got customer T in the Save As box. I'll click OK. Now I get this message up. It says there is no primary key defined. Although a primary key isn't required, it's highly recommended. What does this primary key thing mean? Essentially, a primary key is that one unique value that sets off each record from every other record. Now we've already set that up. That's that customer ID. But we didn't tell Access that that's our primary key. You can do that manually by clicking on this primary key button over here, but I almost always forget to do it, which is why I left this in the video. I want you to see that I always forget to do it. Now you know what this means. So, do we want to create a primary key now? I'll just say yes. Access sets up that primary key for us, and you can see the little key symbol right there next to customer ID. Creating a primary key forces that field to never have duplicate values, which auto numbers won't anyway. And it does something called setting up an index, which we'll talk about indexing in a future lesson. Now that our table is all set, I'm going to go ahead and close it by clicking on the X over here. And now you can see the customer T right here in the navigation pane, all set to be opened up and have some data entered into it. Lesson 6 will begin entering data into our customer table. Let's go ahead now and enter in some records into our customer table. Take your mouse and double click on the customer T. That'll open up the customer table right over here. This is what we call data sheet view because it looks like a big spreadsheet. So in Access they call it a data sheet. Now the first field that you notice is the customer ID. And you see the word new in parentheses. That's our auto number. As soon as we start typing in a record into this row, that new will change to the next available auto number, which should be 1. So I'm going to press Tab to move over to the first name field. I'll type in myself, Richard, and notice as soon as I do, my customer ID becomes 1. I'll press Tab again, last name, Tab. I'll type in my company name, Access Learning Zone. Now notice that even though the column is pretty narrow, all the data will still type in there. If you want to make this wider, you can just click and drag this little boundary here between the two columns. See that? Click and drag. If you move your mouse over it, you get that double pointing arrow, just like in Excel. As a shortcut trick, you can also double click right here, and that will resize the column exactly as wide as it needs to be to fit whatever data is currently in it. Alright, I'll press Tab again, put in my address, let's say P.O. Box 101, Tab, City of Amherst, State, New York. Now I'm going to just abbreviate my states with 2 characters. Yes, you can make this a drop-down box. I will teach you how to do that in a future lesson, where you can pick from a list of states. That works great if you only have customers from the United States and maybe Canada. If you're dealing with other countries, I'll also show you a technique in our advanced classes where you can pick the country first and then only see a list of states or provinces from that country. That's a more advanced technique. We'll talk about that in time. For now, just type in a 2-digit state. Tabbed my postal code or zip code here in the US, 14226. Tab. Now the country field I'm going to leave blank if the customer is in the United States. I would say 90% of my customers are in the US, and that's just fine. If you want to leave it blank, that's okay. If you want to actually type the country in there, that's fine too. I'll press Tab. Email address, I'll type in richard.rost@amacron.com. Notice how it comes in as a hyperlink. Again, I'll widen out the column by double-clicking right here. If I were to click on this right now, notice the little finger. That would launch my email program. Usually Microsoft Outlook if you're using Microsoft Office or whatever other email program you happen to have installed. For my website, I'll type in www.accesslearningzone.com and press Tab. Again, I'll widen out that column. And once again, if you click on that link, it should launch in your web browser. This brings us to the phone number field. Now, personally, I like typing just the digits into a phone number field. Here in the US, it's a 10-digit number. 3 for the area code, a 3-digit prefix, and then a 4-digit suffix. So, for example, 716-555-1212. Tab. Do not type in any parentheses or dashes. Just type in the raw data. Later on, when we get to formatting, I will show you how you can format that phone number to appear however you want in your forms and reports. For now, though, just type in the numbers. This brings us to the Num Employees field. I'll type in 2 and press Tab. For the discount rate, let's say I give myself a 50% discount. I'll type in 50% and press Tab. Now notice what happens. In Access, just like in Excel, percentages are considered fractions of 1. So if you type in 50%, you get 0.5. If you type in 25%, you get 0.25. 100% is equal to 1. So you can either type it in that way or type it in as, in this case, 0.5. Again, later on in a future class, when we get to formatting numbers, I'll show you how you can display that as a percentage in your tables, queries, forms, and reports. Moving on, we have the Customer Sense field. In here, remember, this is a date-time field. You can type in either a date or a time or a combination of both. So I could type in 11/15/11 like that, and I get 11/15/2011. I can type in 4:15 p.m. and I get that time. Or I can type in a combination of both. I can type in 11:15, 5 p.m., just like that. Now, I get all those number signs because the column is too narrow to display all that information. So again, I'll widen the column out, and there you can see all the information. Now, that is the default way in which Access displays date-time fields. Again, when we get to formatting, I will show you how you can create a custom format to display that however you want to. For Customer Sense, though, I don't think we need a time on that. So I'll just type in, let's say, 3/1/90. One of the nice new things in Access 2010 is the added date picker. This little calendar control right there. See that little box that looks like a calendar? Go ahead and click on that, and you'll see a little calendar opens up. You can scroll through the months right here. You can pick a day by just clicking on it. You can also jump right to today's date. And there it goes. So you can use this to pick whatever date you want. Now, a few quick notes on dates. First of all, in a future class, I will teach you how to set a default date. So when you create a new record, it can automatically insert today's date for you. That's a little more advanced. We'll talk about that later. The second thing, if you just type in a month and day, Access will automatically default to the current year. It's currently 2011, so if I just type in 3/14, I get 3/14/2011. If you type in a 2-digit year from 00 to 29, Access will default to 2000 to 2029. If you type in a 2-digit year from 30 to 99, Access will default to 1930 through 1999. So if I type in 1145, I get 1945. If I type in 1112, I get 2012. The cutoff year is 29. Now you can change that year if you want to. It's in your Windows control panel. It's not part of Access. It's in the regional settings portion of the control panel. Next we have the credit limit. I'll type in $2,000. Notice that Access will automatically format that as a currency for me. Is active is a checkbox. You can either use your mouse and click there, or if you're a keyboard person like me, I hate to stop and have to grab the mouse when I'm doing data entry. You can just use the space bar to turn that box on or off. Next we have the notes field. You can type just about as much information in here as you'd like to. Rick is a swell guy. Now notice when I press tab, I'm done with that record, and Access brings me down to the next blank row where I'm all set and ready to type in the next customer. Now a couple of quick notes before we type in any more customers. First, down here on the bottom, here's the scroll bar. We can use this to scroll left and right because you can see all the data takes up more than one screenful. Now the notes box right here, as you can see, you can type a lot of information in here. You might not be able to fit it all easily on the screen. So there's a little keyboard trick I want to teach you. It's Shift F2. Shift F2. That means to hold down the Shift key and press the F2 key across the top row of your keyboard. When you press Shift F2, this zoom window opens up. And you can come in here and type as much information as you want, and then when you're done, hit OK, and that gets saved back inside that field. You can do that for pretty much any field, but it works extremely well for notes fields. When we build our forms to work with this data on the screen, we'll make our notes fields much larger so you can type more information into them without having to hit Shift F2. Again, keep in mind, when our database is built, we're not going to be using the tables to enter and edit data. You never want your end users directly working with your tables and queries. You want to keep them limited to just forms and reports. So we'll make a notes field big enough on our form so we can easily edit it. Right now, we're the developers and we're working on building this database. And personally, I think it's easier to build your forms and reports if you already have some sample data in your tables. So that's why we're typing in some sample customer records before we build our forms. Now this click to add column over here is where you can optionally add additional fields to your table. I don't like using it. I like going back into design mode to do that. Remember, you can easily switch back to table design mode by clicking on the view button up here, or drop this down and pick design view. But I'm just going to come down here, scroll back over to the left, and enter in my second customer. In Lesson 7, we're continuing to enter data into our customer table. Okay, I'm ready to enter in my second customer. I'll type in Joe Smith from XYZ Corp at 101 Main Street, Buffalo, New York, 14220. I don't have his email address. That's okay. I'll just press tab. I've always been of the mindset that it's better to have no data than to have bad data. That's why I very seldom force users to have to input information. In a future class, I'm going to show you how to make certain bits of information required. However, I almost never require users to have to type something in. You can always generate a query later that says, show me all of the missing data so I can call my customers and get it. Don't force your users to have to type in things like zip codes. What if they don't have it? They'll type in something wrong just to get the record in. Same thing with website. I'll tab past that. I do have his phone number, 716-555-3434. Tab. Num employees, let's say 500. Tab. Discount rate, how about 10%? I'll type it in as 0.1. That's the same as 10%. Tab. Customer cents, how about 3190? Tab. And a credit limit of $500. Active, yes. Notes, no notes. And now I'm on to the next customer. As you can see, once you've got the table all set up, it's now very simple to enter in your records. Now I'm going to type in several different customers, so I've got some sample data to work with in the class. I'd like you to do the same. However, if you don't feel like typing, I'll put these sample records up on my website so you can just copy and paste them. Here are my sample records. If you want to type in the same ones, that's okay. Just make sure you have a couple of different states, a few different last names. Now, if you don't feel like typing and you want to use the same data that I have, you can go to this special web page and download a copy of the data. Just go to 599cd.com/xacdata1. That's a special page. I just set it up. You'll find a copy of the data there. You can copy it and paste it right into your table. Here's the web page. The data is right here in this little window. It's just plain text. Click on this button here that says click to select text. That'll select it. Then press Control-C on your keyboard to copy. That will copy the data to your Windows clipboard. Now switch back over to Access. Go in your customer table. Click right here to select a new blank record. Click in this little box on the left-hand side so you have that arrow there. That'll select the entire record. You can't just be sitting like that, otherwise Access will try to paste all that data into the first name field. You have to select an entire record right there. Then hit Paste on your keyboard. It's Control-V as in Victor. You'll get a message. It says you're about to paste 11 records. Are you sure? Go ahead and say yes. And there's the data. That's how you can copy and paste data between two different applications. In this case, your web browser and Microsoft Access. Now, in this case, I had already typed in these first two records. So those two records are duplicated now in the database. To delete a record, just click on that same spot again. That selects an entire record, and then press Delete on your keyboard. It says you're about to delete one record. Press yes if you're sure. I'll press yes. Now I've got two Joe Smiths. I'll just delete one of those duplicate records. And that's how you can delete a record. Now don't worry if your auto numbers are not the same as mine. That customer ID, remember, we don't have to worry about the customer ID. Access will keep track of that for us. I was playing around a little earlier, copying and pasting some data. I deleted a few sample records. So as you can see here, IDs 3 through 13 are now gone forever. They'll never be reused. But again, that's okay. We don't have to worry about those IDs. Access tracks those for us. Now optionally, also on the web page, I've also included a link right here to download a fresh copy of my database. So if you'd rather do that instead of copying and pasting the text, you can also click right here. Now when you download any database from the web, you're going to see this security warning pop up. It says some active content has been disabled. Click here for more details. If you want to read the details, you can click here. But in a nutshell, Access is running this database in a secure mode. So none of the programming, the Visual Basic Code or macros, will run until you enable that content. This is to prevent people from sending you malicious code, because you can do pretty much anything in Visual Basic. So if you download a database from a source that you might not trust, then you don't want to enable this content. In this particular case, you can trust me, so I'll click on the Enable Content button. Now this database only has one object in it, the customer table. But as you can see when I open it up, there's all of my data. Now, as I mentioned in the introductory video for this course, we have student forums available on the website where you can post any questions that you have about each lesson. If you're watching this course in our online theater, you'll see the student forum for each lesson appear next to the video. Here are some of the questions that students asked about this lesson back in the Access 2003 class. The most popular question is, do you have to save each record as you enter it, or when you're finished entering it? The answer is no. Access will automatically save each record as soon as you move off of it. For example, let's say I come in here and edit Anna Pecor's company name from Pharmacon to Pharmacom. Notice over here on the very left-hand side, this little pencil appears. That means you're in the process of editing that record. In database terminology, we call it a dirty record. Now, as soon as I move off of Anna Pecor's record down to here, notice the pencil goes away. Access just saved that record automatically to the table. You don't have anything more to do. When you close a table, Access also saves the records. In fact, the only time you actually have to save something is when you make a design change or a layout change. Now, a design change would be modifying one of the fields, changing a field name or a property type. Or if you make a layout change, for example, if I make this column a little wider, if I go to close the table, Access says, do you want to save the layout of the table? You can say yes, and then Access will remember the width of that column. So the next time you open it, it'll be the same width. But that has nothing to do with the data in the table, which is saved automatically. Another popular question asked is, how do you move the columns around in the table? Well, to move a column, just click on the column header right here. See how I can see the down arrow? Click there. Then let the mouse go. Now click and drag again in the same spot. Click and drag it to the left, for example. And now I've just moved last name in front of first name. Now that's another example of a layout change. It doesn't really change the structure of the table, but just how the columns are displayed when you open up Datasheet View. I'll move that column back where it was by clicking and dragging it back to the right. Now those are a couple examples of questions that students who've taken this course before you have asked. So if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the student. In Lesson 8, we're going to learn how to sort and filter the data in our tables. In the last couple of classes, we loaded some data into our customer table. Right now, we only have 11 records in our table, which makes the data pretty manageable. What happens if we have 1,100 or 11,000 records in this table? Then the information becomes a little more difficult to work with. Right now, for example, if I wanted to see all the customers from New York, I could just scroll over, find the state field, and you can clearly see them here. A few more down below. If I have 11,000 customers in my table, it might not be as easy to see those customers. So what happens if the boss comes up and says, all right, we have 20,000 customers. I want to see a list of customers only from New York, sorted by last name, and I want it on my desk in 5 minutes. What do? If you're in the table, you can easily sort or filter your data to display just the information that you want. Sorting is pretty straightforward. All you have to do is use the little drop-down arrow next to the column name. For example, here's last name. If I drop this little arrow down here, you can see there's sort A to Z or Z to A. That's an ascending or descending sort. So if I click sort A to Z, you can see the last name column is now sorted from A to Z. You can do that with any column that you want. So if you want to sort by company name, just drop down the little box, sort A to Z. And there we go. That's an alphanumeric sort. If you sort a column like state here that has missing values, also called null values, drop that down and sort A to Z. You can see that the empty or null values show up at the top of the list. If you sort a numeric field, like num employees, you see it says sort smallest to largest or largest to smallest. A date time field like customer since, you can sort oldest to newest or newest to oldest. Now there are some advanced techniques with table sorting, and we'll talk about those in future classes. You can do things like setting up multi-column sorts. But for now, on the Home tab, come up here and click on Remove Sort in the Sort and Filter group. That will clear whatever sorts that you have on there. You can also filter your data to show just a subset of the records that are there. For example, the boss only wants to see companies that are from New York. So come up here in the State column, drop the box down, and you'll see down here a bunch of filters. There are checkboxes here for all the different items that are in that list. Right now, all of the items are selected. If I check this box again that says Select All, it turns them all off. Now you can pick individual items to see. For example, if you want to see just the blank records, or just the records from New York, or perhaps even records from New York and Ohio. But the boss only wants to see records from New York, so I'll make sure just that box is checked on. Then I'll hit OK. And now you can see our results are filtered. You can tell that a filter is on a couple of different ways. Right here it says filtered. Down here in the status bar it says filtered. This little symbol appears right here that says filtered, or state equals New York. Even up here on the ribbon, that little guy is highlighted. That says remove filter. You can click on that to remove the filter, just like this one removes the sort. Additionally, if you look down here, these are what are called navigation buttons. We'll talk more about these when we get to forms. But you can see it says 1 of 5 now instead of 1 of 11. That's how we can tell we're dealing with a filtered set of records. Now yes, you can apply multiple filters. You could filter by state and then by a zip code inside of that state. You can apply a filter and then a sort. For example, right now we have just our customers from New York, so now I can come over here and then sort by last name. Now I have the results the boss wanted. All of the customers from New York sorted by last name, so I could print this out. To print out a table, just come up to File, come down here to the bottom, pick Print, and then select either Quick Print, which sends it right to the printer, or the Print option, which lets you pick the printer, the number of copies, and so on. I don't really want to print right now, so I'll just click the File tab to close it up. Now, I'm going to come in here and click Remove Sort, and then Clear Filter, and that'll put all my data back the way that it was. In fact, you'll see down here it says Unfiltered, and the navigation buttons show 1 of 11. That means I have all of my records. Now, sorting and filtering are okay for you, the developer. Remember, we never want other people to use our tables directly. There's just too much room for too many problems to creep into your database. You don't want end users playing with your tables. This is fine if you just want to get in here, maybe take a look at some records, see some things a different way, sort some stuff. That's fine for you, but not your end users. Also, you can't rely on access to save your sorts and filters in the table. So if you have multiple sets of data that you have to be able to generate these reports on a regular basis, you don't want to constantly keep coming back to the table to reapply filters and sorts. Let's say today you need a list of customers from New York sorted by last name. Tomorrow you might need a list of customers from Pennsylvania with $5,000 or greater credit limits. The next day, a list of customers from California who've been with you for at least a year. You want to be able to generate all of these different kinds of lists of customers without having to keep coming back into the table to make changes. That's what queries are good for. You can set up a query once, customers from New York, sorted by last name, save that as a query. Then in the future, if you want to run it again, you just open up the query and the work is already done. So in the next lesson, we'll learn how to set up a query to do exactly what we just did with the table. However, the query can be saved for future use. In Lesson 9, we'll learn how to build a query, apply a multi-field sort to the query, and a criteria filter. In this lesson, we have the same mission that we had in the last lesson. The boss wants a list of all the customers we have from New York State, sorted by last name. More importantly, I want to create a query to do this so I can pull it up at a moment's notice anytime in the future. To create a query, click on the Create tab, and then over here under the Queries section, you'll see a Query Wizard and then Query Design. Now, the Query Wizard is okay for making some of the more advanced queries, but we're only going to make a very simple query right now, and I want to teach you how to do this from scratch. So come over here and click Query Design. The first thing that you'll see is a blank query is created in the background. Right now it says Query 1. And you'll see the Show Table window. Now, a query can get its data from one or more tables or one or more other queries, or you can see a list of both of them. Now, we only have one table in our database right now, so that's the only thing that we can pull data from. But later on, when we have multiple tables and different queries, we can actually build queries off of all of those things. For now, let's keep it simple. Let's just click on Customer T, click on the Add button, and you'll notice the Customer T goes into the query back here. Now, if I had additional tables or queries that I wanted to add, I could do that now, but I don't. Just the one table is fine. Click on Close, and now you're in the query. Down below under here, you'll see different columns. On the left-hand side, it says Field, Table, Sort, Show, Criteria, and OR. Now, I will tell you, this is one of the stranger things that you'll see in Access. This is one of the weirdest screens to understand, but once you get the hang of it, it's really quite simple. Basically, it works like this. Up here is the table that we're getting the data from. Down here are the fields or columns for the query. So essentially, we take the information that we want to see from the table and bring it down below. So let's say I want to see first name and last name in my query. Click and drag first name and drop it right down here in the first column. Now do the same thing with last name. There's last name. Click and drag and drop it down here into the second column. It's that easy. You can see here's the fields, first name, last name. The table that they're from shows up down below here. We only have one table right now. If you had multiple tables, you might see different table names down here. And that's how you put fields into your query. It's very simple. Now, to see the results that the query is going to produce, take your mouse and click right here on the Run button. See where it says Results? There's a Run button. Looks like an exclamation point. Go ahead and click on that now. And there are the results of the query. Now, all I asked for at this point was, show me a list of all the customers, first name and last name. That's it. It's not sorted yet. There's no filter. I just told the query, show me all the customers, show me their first name and last name. Access gave us exactly what we asked for. Let's say in addition to first name and last name, I also want to see the phone number. Perhaps the reason the boss wants this list is to have someone call all of these customers. So let's add phone number to this query. First, we need to go back into Design View. Remember when we were working on our table, we had Datasheet View and Design View? Same thing over here. There's our button to go back into Design View. If you drop this down, you'll see there's the Datasheet View. A couple of other views are in here. Don't worry about those for now. And there's Design View. Click on Design View, and it puts you back into the Query Design window. So to add another field, just find it up here in the table. Where's phone number? There it is right there. Now, here's a trick. You can click and drag it like I showed you earlier, or just double click on it. Watch this. Click, click, and there it goes. It drops right down there into the next column. Now, go ahead and run your query again, and you'll see first name, last name, and now phone number. The query will display just the information that you want to see. Now, how do we sort this information? Well, we could use the same sort and filter buttons right here in the datasheet view, but those don't necessarily get saved with the query. Here's what I want you to do. Go back into design mode, and right down under here, under the field name, you'll see there's a sort row. This is where we specify the sort for the query. So for example, let's say I want to sort by first name. Click inside this box here, you'll see a drop-down arrow. Click on that. There's ascending, descending, and not sorted. Let's pick ascending, and now run the query. Notice the results are sorted by first name. Alright, back to design view. If you want to sort by last name, first turn this sort off, say not sorted, and then sort only by last name. And now run the query, and you'll see it's sorted just by last name. Now what I'd like to happen is to have the records sorted by last name and then first name. So if the last names are the same, the records would then be in sort order based on the first name, which in this particular case for the Joneses, that did work. Joe came on top of Susan. However, the Smiths are backwards. Peter should be after Joe. But I didn't specify that as my sort. So how do we sort by more than one column? Well, come back into design view. Now in a query, the order in which the fields appear from left to right determines their sort order. So if I say sort both of these fields ascending, first name will get sorted first, and then last name will get sorted. So if I run this query now, you can see it's sorted by first name and then by last name. But that's not what I want. Come back to design view. In order to get last name to sort first, I have to move last name to the left in design mode. So come down here, move right over this gray bar on top of the column. You'll see a downward pointing black arrow. Click right there, then let the mouse go. Now click on the exact same spot and drag your mouse to the left, and that will move the column, just like moving columns around in tables. Now last name will be sorted before first name is sorted. So if I run the query now, that's the sort that I'm looking for. Sorted by last name, and then where two last names are the same, it's sorted by first name. So that's how you do a multi-column sort. Okay, back to design view. Now let's save our query. This is the major benefit of using queries, is we can save this and not have to do any of this work again in the future to get the same list of customers. So I'll come up top and click on the Save button in the Quick Access toolbar, or you can see there by the Control Tip text it says Control S. Control S is a keyboard shortcut that you can press that will also save the query. The Save As dialog box appears. I'm going to save this as my customer Q. No space in there. Customer Q. Q stands for query. And then I'll click OK. Notice the customer queue appears over here in the navigation pane, and we now have a new section called Queries. Customer queue appears here on the tab as well. Now if I close the query, all I have to do in the future to run it to get the same set of customers is just double click on my customer queue, and there it is. Now we're not finished with our customer query just yet, because the boss said I only want to see customers from New York. So we have to somehow filter this list based on the state. So go back to design view. How do we filter based on the state? Well, first we have to get the state field into our query. That's easy to do. We already know how to do that. Scroll down the field list right here and find the state field. Then I'll double click on it. Now I've added the state field to the query. If I run the query right now, you'll see there are all the states. Now I haven't filtered it yet. Again, we could cheat and come up here and apply a filter right here, but these don't reliably get saved in the query. So go back into design mode, and down here you'll see a row that says criteria. The criteria row is essentially a filter for the query. So I'm going to come down here under state in the criteria row, and I'm going to type in NY for New York. Now I'm going to press tab. That moves me over to the right, and look what happens. New York has quotes around it now. That's fine. Basically, it's saying that New York is a text value as opposed to a number value or a date value. That's what I want. We'll talk more about what those quotes mean exactly in future lessons. But now I've set up a criteria that the state has to be equal to New York. Now, go ahead and run the query again, and there you can see just the customers from New York are displayed. Now, I want to save this query, but don't just click on the floppy disk save button, because that's the save command. It will save this customer queue over the old customer queue. Let's use the save as command so we can change the name of the query. This is a trick that I show my students in my Microsoft Word class. If you're working on a document, say a letter, and you're writing a letter to Joe Smith, and you want to send the same letter to Sue Jones, you open it up, make a few changes, go File, Save As, and change the file name. The same thing works in here with database objects. Instead of clicking on the Save button, we're going to go to File, and then Save Object As. Alright, Save Customer Queue to. The default is Copy of Customer Queue. I'm going to change this to Customers from New York Queue, just like that. And then I'll hit OK. The object is saved. Now I'll click on the File tab again to close that down. And here you can see, I'll open this up a little bit. Here you can see both of our queries, Customers from New York and our old customer queue. You can open up the other one by double-clicking on it. Notice here I now have two tabs. They're both open at the same time. There's Customers from New York and just the customers. I'll close that one and then close this one. And see now how I can open up both of these at any time in the future without having to do any more work. The sort and filter, or should I say the criteria, is saved in the query. Now if you want to make a change to this query, let's say you want to save this as Customers from Pennsylvania. All you have to do is go into Design View, find your criteria, which is right over here. Double click. I'll change that to Pennsylvania. I'll go to File, Save Object As, change this to Customers from PAQ. Hit OK. Close the File tab. And now you can see I have multiple queries over here. Now it's time for questions from the student forum. These are questions that previous students have had about the material in this lesson. The first question is, can I edit data in the query? The answer is yes, you most certainly can. Remember, queries themselves do not store data. They're just displaying the data from the table in a different way. So even though you're only seeing last name, first name, phone number here, you can come in here and change these things. So be very careful. Don't make any changes in the query that you wouldn't normally make in the table. The next question, if I wanted to make a report for each state, would I have to make 50 separate queries? The answer, of course, is no. I'm just showing you the very basics of query design right now. Later on, I'm going to teach you how to create something called a parameter query, where you can set up a query so that the user types in the state that he wants to see when he runs the query. So we'll open the query up. It'll say enter the state, type in New York, and there's the records from New York. Close it down again and type in California, and you'll see California. That's called a parameter query, and we will cover that in a future lesson. And finally, another popular question, what is this asterisk on top of the list of customer fields? The asterisk is something you can add to the query if you want to see all of the fields displayed every time the query runs. This way, you can bring in the fields that you want to sort or put criterias on, and then add the asterisk to see all the rest of them. And again, we'll talk about this in more detail in a future lesson. So now we know how to build tables and simple queries. In the next lesson, we'll start working on. In lesson 10, we're going to build a customer form so we can present our user with a nice friendly interface for editing records. So far today, we've seen how to build a table and how to design a couple of different queries. Now, tables and queries are functional and they're necessary for most databases, but they're not very user-friendly to work with, especially if you don't know Access. So in this lesson, we're going to see how to set up a couple of different types of forms. Now, forms are used to work with data on the screen. Forms look a lot better than working with tables and queries directly. That makes it easier for you to find information, which of course makes you more efficient with your database. Forms provide you with additional control and security for your data. You can control exactly what people can look at, which fields they can see, which ones they can edit. Are they allowed to delete records or add new records? All of these things can be controlled using forms. If you currently have paper forms, or perhaps even an Excel spreadsheet that you're working with, you can design a form to mimic those existing paper forms or Excel spreadsheets. This makes it easier for your users to transition into your database. You can display data from multiple tables together on one form. For example, you can show the contact history for each customer on the customer form, or you can show a summary of their recent orders. We're not going to learn how to do that today, but just keep in mind that we can do it. We'll cover that when we get to our expert classes and start talking about relational tables. Forms can display summary information. If you have a form that shows a list of orders, you can put totals in the footer of the form. So at the bottom of the column, you can see the total for all of the orders. In today's class, I'm going to show you how to set up a couple of different simple forms using some of the automatic form techniques. We'll show you how to make some basic modifications to those forms as well. In the next level, we'll spend a lot more time designing custom forms from scratch. Keep in mind that building forms is really more of an art than a science. You can easily spend many hours making your forms look good. I know that I have in the past. Changing around the controls, where they go, changing the colors. It just takes practice. This is something that the more that you do it, the better you'll be at it. So here is how you create a simple form. First, click on the table or query that you wish to base your form on. Generally, you're going to base your forms directly from your tables. However, if you wish to show a custom set of records, you can build a form directly from a query. We'll show you how to do that in a future lesson. For now, we're going to click on Customer Table, click on Create, and then over here you'll see the Forms group. There are several different ways to build a form in Access. The simplest is just to click on the Form button. Access will go ahead and just build the form for you. It won't give you any options. It'll just say, here you go, there's your form. I'll show you how that works in just a minute. Next we have Form Design, which is you building the form from scratch. Now, Form Design is actually my preferred method for building forms. However, it's a little more advanced, and we're going to cover that in the next class. Form Design lets you really get in there and make changes to every aspect of the form, but you have to know how to build them from the ground up. So again, we'll cover that in the next class. Blank Form will build the form for you and then lets you add the controls where you want them. Again, we'll see this in a future lesson. The Form Wizard will help you to build a form by asking you some simple questions. You can then customize the form once it's built. I personally don't like the Form Wizard, and we'll cover it in a future lesson. Navigation forms allow you to set up a simple menu interface with buttons where you can click on them to go between the different parts of your database. And then under More Forms, there are some different optional types of forms. We'll see a couple of these today, like Multiple Items, Datasheet, and Split Form. We'll talk about the others in future classes. So as you can see, there are a lot of different options available for forms. But for now, let's just click on the simple form here. When you click on it, a second goes by, and then Access throws together the form for you. On the form, you'll see a header across the top here that says Customer T. Then you'll see each one of the fields from your table down below here. There's first name, last name, and so on. This is called a single form because each screenful shows one record, a single record at a time. You can see each field consists of a label and a text box. The label is right here on the left. It indicates which field this is. On the right side, you'll see the text box. This is where the actual data goes. Now, when Access first builds the form for you, it puts you inside of layout mode. What that means is you can come in here and change the layout of the form to look like whatever you want. You'll see up top here it says Form Layout Tools. We can change the design, the arrangement, and the format of the form. If you click on the Design tab, way over here on the left, you'll see Views. Just like we had with tables and queries. If you drop this down, you'll see there's Form View, Layout View, and Design View. Right now, we're in Layout View. You can see that Layout View has a little orange border around it. This means we can edit the layout of the form. Once we're happy with the layout, we can switch to Form View, and that's where we can actually edit our data. That is what your end users will be working with all the time, Form View. You don't want to let them mess with your layout or your design. Now, Design View we'll talk about in the next class. Design View lets you get in there and make changes to the properties of the objects, move things around a little bit more, and basically make more changes than you can with just editing the layout. We'll talk about that again in the next class. Now, the first thing that you might want to do in layout mode here is to resize some of the objects on your form. For example, you can see that first name and last name have pretty big text boxes. I don't need them to be that large. So let's make them shorter. I'll move my mouse over the border there. Notice how it changes into a double pointing arrow. At this point, just click and drag, and you'll notice that the entire row gets resized. Notice that first name and phone number over here on the right also got resized. When you're in layout mode, Access tends to work in columns and rows. So if you want to resize the column, for example, just move right here on the right border of one of the text boxes in that column, click and drag, and notice how the entire column is changed. You can also do that with the labels themselves. Click over here on first name, and you can change the width of that column. So take a few minutes now and just practice resizing these text boxes to be the height and width that you want. And there we go. I'm now happy with the way my form looks, and I'm ready to save it. I'm going to come up to the top here and click on the Save button, or hit Control-S. The Save As dialog box appears. I'm going to change this to Customer F, F for Form. Remember, T for Table, Q for Query, F for Form, R for Report. And then I'll hit OK. Notice my Customer F is now saved over here in a Forms section of the navigation pane. It also says Customer F up here on the tab. This still says Customer T. This right here is just a title for the form. You can keep this, you can change it, or you can get rid of it completely. Whatever you'd like to do. Personally, I never use these. So I'm going to click on it and press Delete on my keyboard. That will get rid of it. You can also change or delete this little logo right here. I'm going to get rid of it. That'll save me some space on the screen. I almost never use those little titles and logos up top on the form. If you want to edit or change them or make new ones, you'll find them on the Design tab right over here where it says Logo, Title, and you can also add the date and time. Again, we'll talk about these in more detail in the next class. Now that my form is finished, I'm going to come over here and click on the Close button. Access asks me if I want to save the changes to the design of the form because I deleted that title and logo. I'll say yes. The form is closed. And now I can open it back up by double-clicking on the customer form over here. Now I'm in Form View. Form View is where your users will work all the time. This is where you can come in and make changes to the data in the form. Remember, this data is not actually saved in the form. It's really saved in the table. The form is just displaying it for you in a different way. So any changes you make here are reflected in the data in your table. Let's say, for example, this customer changes his phone number. I can come right in here and type in the new phone number. If I want to move between the records, I can come right down here and click on these navigation buttons. That'll move me to record 2, 3, 4, backwards. This button moves you to the first record. This button moves you to the last record. And this little button right here moves you to a new blank record so you can begin entering a new customer. So I can click on the first name field and start typing in a new customer, new guy, XYZ Corp. I'm using the Tab key to move from field to field. Remember, the pencil over here indicates this is a dirty record. It hasn't been saved to the table yet. It will be saved as soon as I move off of this record or close the form. If you wish to delete a record, simply click anywhere on this big tall bar over here on the left side of the form. That's called the record selector. Once you click on that, you can press the delete key on your keyboard to delete this record. Access will warn you, you're about to delete one record, are you sure? If you say yes, you cannot undo that. The record will be gone for good. You will also find buttons on the ribbon to sort and filter, work with records such as delete, save, go to a new record, and so on. There are also find and replace buttons. We'll talk about all these features in much more detail in the next class. For now, let's just close this form by clicking over here. I want to quickly show you how to create 2 additional types of forms that are extremely handy. So click on Customer T, then click on Create, come over here to More Forms, and then you'll see Multiple Items. Click on Multiple Items. Again, Access throws together a quick form for you, but notice how on the screen you can see multiple records. I'm in layout mode, so I'm going to resize this because it made the rows very tall. But notice here, you can see all the different customers on one form. This is called a continuous form. We'll spend a lot more time with this type of form in future classes, but I know a lot of people always ask me how to create these, so I wanted to show you where it is real quick. I'm just going to close this without saving it. When Access says, do you want to save it, I'll just say no. Another very handy type of form, click on Create, More Forms. There's this one here called a split form. The split form is a combination of a standard single form up top and a datasheet view on the bottom. And as you click between the different records on the bottom, you can see that it moves the current record on the top. And again, this is very handy. You can scroll down through your list of customers, click on the one that you want to see, and that customer's information is loaded in the top half of the form. Again, that's called a split form. These are just a couple examples of the many different types of forms that you can build in Access. And again, over the next couple of classes, I will show you how to create lots and lots of different types of forms. For now, again, I'm just going to close this form, and I'll say no to save changes. So that, in a nutshell, is how you can build a simple customer form. In Lesson 11, we'll build a couple of different customer reports, including some customer mailing labels. So far, we've learned how to create tables, queries, and forms. Reports are pretty much just like forms, except reports are designed to be printed out or sent as an email attachment, or basically presented to someone who's not using your database. Creating a report is very similar to creating a form. First, we click on the table or query that has our data. Then we click on Create. And over to the right, we'll see the Reports section. It's very similar to the Forms section. First, we have the basic report, where Access just builds us a report. Then we have Report Design, which lets us get in and modify the nooks and crannies of the report. We'll talk about report design in a future class. We have the blank report, where Access just throws a blank report together and lets you insert fields where you want them. We have a report wizard, which will ask you some questions and design the report that way. And finally, there's a labels wizard right here, which is used for creating mailing labels. We'll walk through the labels wizard in a few minutes, but first, let me show you the basic report. I'm just going to click on the report button, and after a moment, Access throws this report together for us. As you can see, Access put together a simple customer report. It looks just like a continuous form that we built earlier in our Forms section. If I scroll down, I'll see multiple customers, one per line. If I go back up to the top of the report, you can see there's a report header up here. You can, again, delete that title if you want to, or you can double-click on it and type something in, like customer report, and then press Enter. Notice over on the right, you'll see the time and date. This is usually handy on reports, so you can see when the report was printed. Again, just like forms, reports have different views. There's Report View, Print Preview, Layout View, which we're in right now, and Design View. Now, Design View we'll talk about in a future class. Layout View is what we're in right now. That lets us come in here and make some changes to the report. Now, you have limited control over the height of these objects because Access needs to print all of the information in each text box. So as you can see here, the company name is forced onto a second line, so it has to be able to grow that text box vertically in order to show all the information. You can get away without doing that on forms because in a form text box you can scroll up and down. Can't quite do that on a report. So in the report, you can really only easily control the horizontal size. If you want to see what this is going to look like when you actually print it, come over here and go to Print Preview. This will give you a better approximation of what your report is going to look like when it's finally printed. Notice in the bottom here, we have zoom controls, just like in Word and Excel, where we can zoom out to get a better view of our document. We can scroll down. We can go to page 2 right here, and page 3. You can change the size of the page, letter, legal, executive, and so on. You can adjust the margins right here. Right now they're set to narrow. You can change them to wide or normal. Here's where you can also come to export this report as a data file. If you want to send it as an email attachment, click on Email. You can export it as a PDF file, or send it to a text file, or even an Excel file. I'll click on the PDF or XPS button. Browse to where you want to save the file. Change the file name if you want to, and the Save As type, I'll leave it PDF. Then I'll come over here and click on Publish. And now I have a nice formatted PDF file that I can save for later, email to someone, put up on my website, and so on. I'll go ahead and close that. Access is asking us if we want to save these export steps for the future. I'm going to just close this. We'll talk about this later. Essentially, if you have certain reports that you export on a regular basis, you can save these steps so you don't have to repeat the wizard every time. We'll talk more about this in a future class. For now, I'll just hit close. When you're done with the print preview version of your report, just click on the Close Print Preview button, and that will put you back into your report layout mode. Now, there's not a ton of difference between Layout View and Report View. Report View just shows you the data and doesn't let you make layout changes, whereas Layout View obviously allows you to make those changes. When you have your end users opening up the reports, you don't want them playing with the layout changes. And yes, in a future lesson, I'll show you how to restrict all that. Now, let's close this report. Do I want to save the changes to this report? Sure. I'll save this as my customer R, and then hit OK. And now you can see I have a reports group over here in my navigation pane, and you can see customer R is right there. To open it up again, I'll just double click on it, and then close it again. Now sometimes you might want to make a report based on data from a query. For example, let's see the boss only wants to see those customers from New York again. This time click on Customers from New York queue, go to Create, click on Report, and now the report is only getting its data from the query. So as you can see here, I'm only getting 5 records instead of all 11. And I can change this report header by just clicking in it and editing it that way. Customers from New York. I'll close this and say no to save changes. If you want a report that looks more like this, the single form, where you only have one customer per page, what you do is click on the customer table, or query if you want to, go to Create, and use the report wizard for this. The report wizard first says which fields do you want on your report. Pick the table or query here if you haven't already. We'll stick with the customer table, and then choose which fields you want to be on this report. Let's say I don't need the customer ID. How about the first name? I'll click on it and then click on this arrow here. That moves it from the available fields over to the selected fields. Last name, you can also just double click on the field like this. How about city, state, and phone number? Just those fields. I'll click Next. Do you want to add any grouping levels? This is handy if you want to group all of the customers from New York together, for example. But for now, I'll just skip this. I'll click Next. What sort order do you want for your records? Let's say you want to sort by last name. That's fine. You can sort by up to 4 different fields. Next. How do you want the report to look? Tabular is the look we had earlier. There's also columnar, which is the look we're looking for, and a justified report. Let's go with columnar. Hit Next. What title do you want for the top of the report? Let's change this to Customers. That's what goes in that title box. And then Finish. After a second, Access puts the report together for you and puts you in print preview mode. And there we are. Notice my mouse pointer is changed to a magnifying glass. If you click somewhere on the report, it zooms you out. And you can click to zoom back in again. Notice you see just the fields that you requested to be on the report. We pick those in the wizard. Let's close this report. And I don't want to save this one either, so I'll just say no. Notice the wizard actually went ahead and saved a copy of that report in the database. It'll sometimes do that right when it's finished building the report. In this particular case, I don't want it, so I'll click once on it and then press Delete on my keyboard. It says, do you want to permanently delete the report? I'll say yes, and now it's gone. Now let's make some mailing labels. Click on Customer T, hit Create, then in the Reports section, click on Labels. The label wizard loads up. Come down here where it says Filter by Manufacturer and find the manufacturer of the type of labels that you want to use. There are a ton of different manufacturers in here. I'm using Avery Labels. Then find the product number. Each Avery label type has a product number. I'm using 5160s. That's the label that gives you 30 on a page. There's 3 across and 10 down. I'll click Next. Choose the font size, the font weight, and the color that you want for the font on your labels. Again, I'll just press Next. The defaults are fine. Now we're asked to set up a prototype label. Essentially, this is what you want your mailing labels to all look like. I'll start with first name. Now you can either double click on it or click on it once and then press this button here. Following first name, I want a space, so I'll press the space bar on my keyboard. Then last name. Now to move down to the next line, I'll press enter. Company name is next. Enter. Address. Enter. And finally, city, spacebar, state, spacebar, postal code, spacebar, country. That's another reason why I wanted to leave country blank, because most of my customers are from the US, and so it just won't print anything there. If it's a different country like Canada, it should show Canada. Now I'll press next again. Which fields would you like to sort by? If you're running bulk mail, you might want to sort by zip code. Press next again. What name would you like for the report? How about let's go with customer mailing label R. R for report. Then finally I'll click finish. And here you can see the print preview of our mailing labels. You can click and zoom out and see all the mailing labels. Now you just have to feed this into your printer and click on the print button. The print button is right here on the left-hand side of the print preview tab. When you're done, just click the close print preview button. This will actually put you into design mode. Notice in design mode, you can see the different individual text boxes. You can see the details section, the page header, some ruler bars up here. We'll talk about all these things in our future classes. For now, I'll just close the report. Now, if you go to run this report in the future, if you double click on it, it will open up the report in report view. And you'll see here that you don't have any columns. In order to see your columns, you'll have to come up here, drop this down, and go to Print Preview. Some of you might also get this warning message. It says some data may not be displayed. There is not enough horizontal space on the page for the number of columns and the column spacing you specified. Essentially, the columns and the column spacing need to be adjusted. Usually this is because of the print drivers that you have on your system. We'll talk about different remedies for this in the future lessons, but for now, just click OK, and your report should still be displayed. In a future lesson, I'll teach you how to deal with that error message, and I'll show you how to make a button on your navigation form. We'll make a main menu that will open up this report or even print it directly without having to switch into print preview mode. For now, let's just close this report. So now, we've built a customer table, a couple of different customer queries, a customer form, a simple customer report, and some customer mailing labels. You now have the beginnings of a great Access database that you're building yourself. Over the next couple of classes, we'll add lots more to this database, and you'll see everything that Access can do. Now let's take a few minutes to review what we learned in today's class. We learned some database terminology, the benefits of using a database, and the parts of an Access database, including tables, queries, forms, and reports. We learned how to plan a database, including determining what tables and fields you need. We learned about the different parts of the Access interface, including the ribbon menu. We learned how to build a customer table, how to set up different fields in our table. We learned about the different types of data that those fields can hold, and we learned about primary key fields. We learned how to enter and edit data in our tables and how to work with records. We learned how to sort and filter data in our tables. We also learned that that's not always good enough because sorting and filtering isn't permanent. So because of that, we built a couple of different queries to show our customer information in different ways. We constructed a customer form to provide our user with a nice, clean, user-friendly interface to work with data. We also built a couple of different customer reports, including some mailing labels. And we learned how to print reports, send them as email attachments, or save them as PDF files. What's next? The next class in the series is Access 2010 Beginner Level 2. For complete information on this course, an outline of topics covered, plus some sample lessons, visit my website at accesslearningzone.com. While you're on my website, you will find that I have lots of lessons available for Access 2003. I'm currently in the process of updating all of my courses for Access 2010. However, I haven't yet re-recorded all of my older advanced lessons. If you find a course that you're interested in that hasn't been updated yet, feel free to purchase it, and you will receive a free upgrade to the Access 2010 version of that course when it's released. Once you're beyond the basics, Access 2010 is close enough to 2003 that you should be able to follow along with the older videos. Many of my students have so far. This will allow you to continue learning with my Advanced Access lessons before the 2010 versions are ready. Once again, if you have any questions or comments about the material covered in today's class, please feel free to post them in the Access Student Forums, which you can find next to the video window if you're online, or by visiting accesslearningzone.com/forums. If you need help with a Microsoft Access project that you're working on and your questions weren't answered in today's class, you can visit my technical support page at accesslearningzone.com/techhelp. I have options available for both free and paid support, and I do my best to provide you with a prompt response. Your questions aren't limited to just Microsoft Access. You can ask me anything computer related, including Windows, Word, Excel, web design, Photoshop, and lots more. I often release new courses and free video tutorials. If you'd like to stay up to date with these new releases, you can subscribe to my blog at accesslearningzone.com/blog. Also, make sure to become a fan of my Facebook page at facebook.com/accesslearningzone, and you can follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/599cd. If you require help with your courses, assistance placing an order, or any other type of customer service, you can contact us online at accesslearningzone.com/contact. We also do our best to have live customer service specialists available as much as possible. Now, the only way I can make these classes better is with your feedback. Visit accesslearningzone.com/survey right now and let me know what you thought of today's class. Did I go too fast? Too slow? Did I cover enough material? Give me your feedback today, and also let me know what topics you would like to see covered in future lessons. Thank you for learning with accesslearningzone.com. I hope you've enjoyed this class, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. This course is copyright 2011 by accesslearningzone.com. All rights reserved. This course may not be reproduced, copied, edited, or otherwise distributed without the express written permission of accesslearningzone.com. This course is sold on a per-user basis. Please do not share this course with others. If you require licenses for additional users, please contact us for discounted multi-user pricing. This course